But I also want to talk about a couple of interesting quarterback situations. Right? Last weekend, we saw Jarrett Stidham play, and he played well for the Raiders in a loss. Right? And yesterday, we had Daniel Jeremiah on the show, and he echoed what I said, which is like, man, doesn't that make sense of Tom Brady to play in Vegas and play with Josh McDaniels? Now, Dan Byer quietly predicted a long time ago San Francisco, and it felt like, and still feels like that's a possibility. Dan, I think the issue with that seems to be he never played in that system. That's not a quarterback-driven system. That's a system where you can be a really good quarterback within it, but it feels like it takes a young man's mobility. Is that fair?
I'll go back and tell Dan in September this. No, but I don't know. I think mobility is an added plus, but I wouldn't call like Jimmy Garoppolo mobile. You know, maybe he can move a little, and Tom can't move at all. But I don't know. Garoppolo was athletic. He's just gotten hurt a bunch, and that's hurt his mobility. Sure, but it's not like it's a Trey Lance, even Brock Purdy type of guy. I don't think is needed. And I think that Tom's actually accuracy and ability to get the ball to playmakers would make up for some of that. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it's there. You're connecting the dots, and I thought, man, that's the same thing I'm thinking. And part of it was, I guess I thought when Derek Carr got his contract extension, well, Derek Carr's the guy there. And then you look further in the details, and you know what they kind of did with Derek Carr is they reworked his deal and gave this. We see this in college sports all the time. A guy gets the extension, but really what they do is they dial back the buyout because it just makes it easier for them to fire him at the end of the year. I think that's what they did with Derek Carr. And then you look at, okay, Josh McDaniels needs a quarterback. Doesn't that make sense?
I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about Brady to the 49ers. Which is what I said.
I was talking about Brady to the 49ers, which I was all in on, and I still think makes sense because of they got dudes, right? He's tired of, I mean, that's a mishmash team he's playing with in Tampa. Not that they don't have some players, but they have, I mean, you like kind of go through it. But then I've kind of talked myself into Vegas as Vegas. They're both going to need quarterbacks. And I just wonder which would be the place that he would. And we also don't know if he'll play. We also don't know if he'll retire. I just don't see him retiring after this type of season.
There's also the absolute reality, because it happened when Tom left New England, of who actually does want him. Yep. And while there was the report where we did think it was Vegas, where Tom was like, oh, they're sticking with that guy, it wasn't like there were 10 other teams that were looking for him. It worked out that Tampa was one of those, and Tampa had players around them, and they didn't want Jameis Winston after the 30-pick season. So
yeah. So which is, there's some similarities there to the Raiders. The difference, I think, would be that obviously the Josh McDaniels and their specific bond. But again, like, who's to say that they don't? Josh McDaniels doesn't say, "Hey, we got to rebuild this team. Why don't we rebuild it with Jarrett Stidham making limited money, and then build a whole team around him?" He obviously is a believer in Stidham because he's been with him going back to the New England days. So there's a lot to it. I do think that if Brady wanted to go to Vegas, they would make that happen, right? Doesn't that make sense? It's a lot like if he wants to go to the Niners. The Niners would be the one that you go, maybe, but I still think both teams would, end of the day, want him based upon their quarterback situation. Like, both of their quarterback situations are different now than they were when he went to Tampa. When he was on the market previously, Garoppolo was more solidified in San Francisco. When it was Vegas, everybody thinks that's the place where he said, you're going to keep that guy? Didn't we determine that was Derek Carr that he was talking about?
Yeah, that's who I thought. And then when the Dana White thing happened, saying that they thought that he was going to be a Raider.
Yeah, that all made sense, right?
Yeah.
It did all make sense. I don't know, it's going to be interesting. The other one is the Lamar Jackson thing, where, this story's picked up a little bit of speed. And again, I've never, nor would I ever accuse him. He's not faking an injury. He hurt his knee. But yeah, like, if you've listened to any of the press conferences, involving John Harbaugh. I mean, take a listen to this. This is a Q&A. John Harbaugh was asked if he thinks Lamar Jackson will be healthy enough for the playoffs. This is his answer.
I'm just probably going to leave all that stuff alone. I'm going to focus on the game and just get ready to coach our guys and have our guys get ready to play the game.
Doesn't that sound like a weird answer? We didn't ask. He wasn't asked about his contract. He wasn't asked about there was no reason to be defensive or defiant or any of that stuff, right? Like, Dan, did you hear what I heard? Like, that's a weird answer to a very normal. Yeah. You're talking about the league's MVP 2 seasons ago. He was asked if he'd be ready to play for the playoffs, and he gave not just a no answer, but like a hey, I'm not even gonna talk about. Like, what? That felt off to me.
It actually would be easier, considering the contract situation. A lot of times the contract and what is going on isn't playing into this. But if it was, hey, are you going to – Jimmy Garoppolo, perfect example. We don't know what Jimmy's future holds afterwards, but we are wondering, geez, if the 49ers make the Super Bowl, would Jimmy Garoppolo be available for that game? Like, that's a conversation that we're having. And so that – probably should be the conversation that we're having with Lamar Jackson, being like, is he going to be available for the playoffs where it would matter most? But to have that answer is very unique.
Yeah. Jay Stu, what'd you hear when you heard that answer?
This is what I didn't hear. I didn't hear I can't speculate on his health 2 weeks from now, but I could tell you this much. The guy is working his butt off to get ready for the playoffs. Good
point.
He didn't say that.
No, good point. Right? Isn't that what they always say too?
Yeah.
Right? They always go like, no one wants to play more. No one wants to play more than Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's the leader of our team. There was nothing. There was play it for me one more time. I would say I might appreciate it.
I'm just probably going to leave all that stuff alone. I'm going to focus on the game and just get ready to coach our guys and have our guys get ready to play the game.
I'm not searching for something there. I'm not making something up. And look, it's a little bit odd. Then you factor in that this is essentially what Richard Sherman said he should do. Richard Sherman on Amazon said, like, if I'm Lamar Jackson, I shut it down. I don't have a contract extension. Like, I don't put myself out there in harm's way. No, thanks. Now, I think he plays in the playoffs because dude's a competitor. He's the leader of the team, and he wants a gigantic contract. And, right, he's not going to do it till he's completely right. But could he play? I think Lamar Jackson. I don't know. How many games he missed? 5 games? And no update? No. Hey, man, nobody's working harder. Nobody wants it more. None of that? That seems weird. Seems very, very weird. And so again, I look at it and I say, reasonably, is it reasonable to believe that Lamar Jackson is dragging this thing out because he's making a point? You're not willing to give me a contract extension? Because again, listen to the narrative of so many people. Oh, they're not willing to give him a contract extension. That's actually not accurate in any way. They have offered him a gigantic contract, just not fully guaranteed $250 million plus. And if this is your first time listening to me talk about this, it's fine. Okay, especially we're new on in DC. If you base it upon normal comps, guys normally get $1 more than the guy before. And whether you think he's better or worse than Deshaun Watson, he's had an MVP season. Deshaun has not. He's got no off-the-field issues. Obviously, we know about Deshaun's. He suffered no major injuries. Deshaun tore his ACL in college and in the pros. So he should, on precedent, he should get a bigger contract than Deshaun Watson. The problem is that there's a bunch of other quarterbacks that didn't get a contract bigger than Deshaun Watson after Deshaun Watson signed his deal because it's an outlier contract. But if that's his argument, it's a fair argument. The problem is the Ravens are like, and nobody else would do that deal. And you can sit there and go, I'm not going to play, but like they own your rights. So when you're done at the end of this year they can franchise tag you. And then they can do it again next year. And then they can actually transition tag you the following year if they wanted to. But when you hear enough people say, well, they're not offering him, a contract, that's not true. But this is, look at it. Remember his Twitter stuff where if you don't love Lamar Jackson for $250 million, you don't love Lamar. That's his own words. You don't love Lamar. And I'm not guessing. I'm sure because I've seen it on TV and heard it on radio. Enough people saying like, why did he even play in training camp? Why did he get dressed for the start of the season? Like his leverage was not playing, withholding services to get the contract he wanted it. And Richard Sherman then on Amazon when he went down said like, hey, I'd shut it down. I got no contract extension. Guys don't just come up with this stuff. That's when you talk to enough people. It's an interesting one. An interesting one to say the least. By the way, again, there's just so many different scenarios there. Right? Because Dan and I are operating under the premise that, hey, Brady, first, we don't know if he wants to play. If he wants to play, as much as the Raiders fit in terms of they got really good personnel, their line's not good. And yes, he likes Josh, but boy, San Francisco's got dudes and feels like they're a quarterback away, and it's his hometown team. Both make sense, but this is Dan's point. It was probably the best one that any of us made, which is like we got to make sure those teams like the Niners still want him. They may I don't know. And then do they want him, or for the Raiders, would they want to trade for Lamar? Will the Ravens offer up the possibility of trading Lamar? That becomes fascinating to me. If you're just joining us, it is really important to point out that Damar Hamlin is awake and some level of alert and improving dramatically. This from a press conference by the two lead doctors on his case. One of his first questions, I thought he said the first question was, did we win? He wrote it down on a piece of paper. So, there was no prognosis given, no promises laid out. No, he's going to make a full recovery, but it does feel like they're on the path to him renewing a normal life. And obviously football takes a dramatic back seat until he gets out of the ICU and into rehab, and we see what that all looks like. But that's a very important thing. It's like, why are you guys talking about football? Because, well, now I think we can.